which I've just arrested you for, okay? This arrest is necessary for a number of reasons. To protect children or other vulnerable persons from you, to allow the prompt and effective investigation of the offences, okay, by means of recorded interview where special warnings may be delivered to you, okay, and to preserve evidence that we believe that you may attempt to destroy or hide if you're not arrested, okay? Do you understand? Yeah.
In the shadowy corners of the UK, a chilling case unfolds, spanning several harrowing years. David Wilson, a name that might escape your memory, is about to become synonymous with terror and depravity. Despite his obscurity, David Wilson stands as one of the most prolific and malevolent criminals ever to grace this channel. At 36 years old, he inhabited the seemingly quiet city of Norfolk, England, a place that harbored a sinister secret hidden beneath its tranquil surface. Little is known about the man behind the mask, but what unfolds will reveal the true depth of his darkness. David Wilson was a roofer by trade, laboring under the sun while simultaneously cultivating a facade of normalcy. He was also involved in children's football, a seemingly innocent pursuit that would later twist into something far more sinister. What's more unsettling is that he continued to live with his mother in her home, a stark contrast to the darkness brewing within him, a darkness that would soon reveal itself in unimaginable ways. But beneath this mundane exterior lay a horrifying secret, one that would erupt into the open in 2020, shocking everyone. David Wilson was not just a man, he was a predator, lurking in the digital shadows, ready to exploit the innocent. Using the vast and often unguarded expanse of the internet as his hunting ground, David skillfully manipulated young and vulnerable individuals into sending him illegal and explicit images of themselves. From 2016 to 2020, he honed his sinister tactics, fabricating countless profiles across various social media platforms, each one a carefully crafted trap designed to ensnare the unsuspecting. These profiles, known as catfish accounts, were expertly constructed illusions, allowing David to masquerade as someone entirely different to lure in his victims. He meticulously crafted these pages using images of teenage girls, weaving a facade so convincing that it blurred the lines between reality and deception, drawing in unsuspecting boys like moths to a flame. David didn't stop at mere images. He constructed entire fake personas for these young girls, breathing life into his deceitful characters. To further shield his nefarious activities, he ventured out to purchase used prepaid mobile phones, using different devices for different victims. He understood the psychology of his prey all too well. What boy wouldn't feel flattered and intrigued to receive a message from a teenage girl, especially one he believed to be genuine? He knew that they wouldn't be thinking clearly if such a message popped up and the account seemed believable. But he also made sure to target those who were young enough to fall for the trap. David would message these boys, keeping it casual at first, and then gradually over time, he would flatter the boys with compliments, turning the conversation flirtatious and then sexual. Typically they would be around 11 to 15. Once he had the boys feeling safe, he would request that they send him an image of themselves naked or showing a specific area of the body. David would sometimes send an image first, using images of teenage girls that he was able to find, which would give the victims that element of trust. With the victims not being old enough and too naive to understand what was happening, the vast majority of them would comply with this request, and they would make the error of sending David a photograph. But David wouldn't just stop here. He would then amp up the requests, asking the victims to send more and more inappropriate images. This then gave David power over the boys, with photographs of the boys doing things they wouldn't want anyone else to see, especially their parents or friends. David could use this to blackmail them into doing whatever he wanted, making threats that if they didn't comply, he would leak the images to those people he knew. This, of course, would be a catastrophic thing to happen in a young boy's life. Now that David had a compromising image of the victim, he would move on to the next stage of his plan. David would make horrific requests. He would force them into sending increasingly extreme imagery of themselves. However, this isn't all he would do. If the victim so happened to have a younger sibling, which would sometimes be the case, David would demand that the victim do the unthinkable. He would force them to commit say on their own siblings, film it, and send it back to him. David would do this over and over again, forcing people below 15 to do all manner of twisted things for his sinister enjoyment. The majority of the victims were between 11 and 15, but some were younger, and they were always contacted through social media. Now, this next part genuinely made me feel sick. The youngest victim in this case was just 4. David had around 15 fake social media accounts at any given time from 2016 until 2020, and he would have around 5 different prepaid mobile phones, giving him some level of anonymity if the victim were to ever complain to the police. David was incredibly prolific. This depraved, despicable, and disturbing obsession became his life, and he was skilled at covering his tracks and keeping anonymous. The victims who David preyed upon would beg him to stop with the threats. Many victims became so depressed and anxious, and their mental health was completely destroyed, so much so that many of them wanted to end everything. Many would even tell David this and explain how scared they were, but he refused to stop and would instead pressure them further with no regard for the victim's well-being or the trauma he was inflicting upon them. Now, as I said before, all of this happened from 2016 to 2020, and David did this to hundreds and hundreds of victims. Some of their stories I shall touch upon soon, but first, something that will likely infuriate many of you watching. The police were actually very well aware of David, yet he was able to victimize hundreds. On the 4th of April 2015, David was arrested. This was due to him possessing indecent images. According to one report, officers carried out a search of the property in which he lived at the time, and an investigation was launched, although it seems that not enough evidence was collected that would be able to bring David to justice, showing his ability to cover his tracks. With not enough evidence to link him to the crimes, no action was taken by the police. However, it does appear that due to the nature of the crimes he was accused of, David's employers and the football association he worked for were informed. According to one report, the police became concerned about his involvement in children's football. From what I can tell, his work with the football team was not allowed to continue. But David was free to continue his disturbing reign. Though, with the police now aware of him, David was being monitored to some degree. Exactly how closely he was being watched is unclear. But one thing is for sure, this brushing with the law did not deter David one bit. The National Crime Agency is a national law enforcement agency in the United Kingdom. It is the UK's lead agency against organised crime, human and weapon trafficking, and cybercrime. 2016 was the year that David is believed to have begun what I described before, using catfish accounts to message boys. The social media site Facebook uses an algorithm to scan through messages that are sent on their platform. According to the head of the NCA, Facebook are able to detect the type of behavior in messaging and are able to determine what is being sent and by who and what age they are. David's profiles were flagged. Facebook shared the data with the NCA in 2017, which identified 20 accounts of boys sending indecent images of themselves to an account of a teenage girl. With this information, a new investigation commenced. Investigators began looking into the IP addresses used to commit the crimes and found them linked to the property owned by David's mother. They then found CCTV footage of him buying a top-up voucher for a mobile phone to one of his fake accounts. The NCA arrested David in August of 2017. The mobile phone used to commit some of the crimes was found hidden in his bedroom. Yet, he was released again. David was not deterred by this arrest. He continued his spree, destroying the lives of hundreds of boys. David was arrested again in January of 2018 due to him being flagged. But again, he was released. And of course, this arrest didn't deter him either. The second he was released by the police, he continued. The investigators would later say that they had to be patient. They wanted to look into David's Snapchat, Google, and Instagram accounts too, in order to gather as much evidence as possible to bring him to justice. They claimed that during this time, they didn't know just how prolific David really was. UK investigators had to file an international letter of request to the US authorities. It was nearly 2 years before the NCA received the data from the US. And with this, the police discovered the gravity of the situation. They were dealing with one of the most prolific cybercriminals in British legal history. And so, finally, in April of 2020, the police were able to get the evidence they needed to make a proper arrest. Before the police entered the property, David realized that the house was about to be raided. So, in a last-ditch effort to dispose of incriminating evidence, he attempted to flush his mobile phone down the toilet.
One detained! 1 male detained!
Beautiful. Clear, Tom. Yeah. You got some? Yeah.
Oh, no, you're not
Right, okay, David, listen in. Okay, as of this moment, okay, you are under arrest for the following offences. I need you to listen to the offences, okay? I'm going to go through them. Right, causing or inciting a child under 13 years of age to engage in activity, causing or inciting a child to engage in blackmail, making and distribution of indecent images, and the possession of indecent images of children. Do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Okay, David, the grounds for this are that we're in possession of material that shows that accounts controlled by you, David Wilson, are involved in the commission of the offences for which I've just arrested you for. Okay? This arrest is necessary for a number of reasons. To protect children or other vulnerable persons from you, to allow the prompt and effective investigation of the offences, okay, by means of recorded interview where special warnings may be delivered to you, okay, and to preserve evidence that we believe that you may attempt to destroy or hide if you're not arrested. Okay, do you understand? Yeah.
I need you to listen to the offences, okay? I'm going to go through them. Right. Causing or inciting a child under 13 years of age to engage in causing or inciting a child to engage in blackmail, making and distribution of indecent images, and the possession of indecent images. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Okay, David, the grounds for this are that we're in possession of material that shows that accounts controlled by you, David Wilson, are involved in the commission of the offences for which I've just arrested you for, okay? This arrest is necessary for a number of reasons. To protect children or other vulnerable persons from you. To allow the prompt and effective investigation of the offences, okay? By means of recorded interview where special warnings may be delivered to you, okay? And to preserve evidence that we believe that you may attempt to destroy or hide if you're not arrested, okay? Do you understand? Yeah, in total, David was arrested 3 times during the 3-year investigation, offending more after each arrest. There were questions as to why David was able to get away with his crimes for so long, leading to the destruction of so many people's lives. One NCA spokesperson said that they were not in a position to charge him before the year 2020 and went on to say, "We applied bail conditions, but we can't be with them 24 hours a day." Wilson was really determined. "We did as much as we could. When you're dealing with someone who has given a fake identification, we have to be 100% certain that that person we arrest and charge is the person behind these fake identities. It takes a lot of time. It's just one of those things. You've got to piece together the evidence like a jigsaw puzzle until you can prove that the fake identities are linked to David Wilson." Investigators now had the grueling job of looking through these messages and images. The case contained more than 250,000 messages and a large number of disturbing images. To think about what the investigators had to look through is truly disturbing. It was discovered that David had selected victims that lived all over the world, the UK, the US and Australia. And it transpired that David had attempted to contact 5,000 people and was successful with 500. David was charged for these sickening crimes. The court proceedings soon began. He admitted to 96 offences at Ipswich Crown Court in November of 2020. This made the trial simple for the rest of the investigation. Eventually, victim statements were read out, which put into perspective just how much David had impacted these people's lives. One victim said he became frightened and trapped inside David's evil game after receiving a message from him when he was 11. He said, "This girl approached me in a way that was normal. She seemed like an approachable person of my age. It was believable for me to think that this was just a normal girl that I thought was attractive at the time, and therefore I continued to talk to her." Images were then sent. The victim then told the court that over time, David began to threaten and harass him. David threatened that he would post the images of him everywhere, and to his parents and his peers. The victim said, "He took advantage of my youth and my innocence. He just wanted more and more indecent images for his own satisfaction." The mother of this victim broke down in tears as she shared the effect of what happened to her son. She told the judge, "I failed to protect my child from the monster who preyed upon him. I was unable to keep him safe." More victims came to the stand. One of the victims, who was incredibly young, was groomed while struggling with the effects of his father dying from cancer. The victim was going through a horrific and traumatic time. David knew this, and yet he continued to exploit the victim, sending them into a spiral of deep depression. The victim explained that his life was already falling apart, but David wanted the images more than he cared about their well-being. Another brave victim came forward and spoke about what they endured at the hands of David Wilson. The victim described how he was suffering during the time due to his grandfather passing away, and then David messaged him on a fake account. The two chatted before the conversation turned flirtatious, and then the victim sent an image of himself. The blackmail and pressure soon followed. The victim begged and pleaded for David to stop, as his grandfather had just died. The victim pleaded that things were tough for them, and that the blackmail and threats were making a challenging time even harder, but David didn't listen. He had zero interest in their sorrow, and he continued to press the victim into sending more and more explicit material. Another victim took to the stand and looked at David. He said, "Do you remember me? I was the little boy who used to play striker. I was 9, and I was a top scorer. I was the kid that you took advantage of, that you blackmailed, that you made feel depressed. I am the kid whose childhood you stole." The court then heard how David, on multiple occasions, would force some of the victims to do unthinkable things to their siblings, something that deeply horrified the court. Because David was compliant and admitted to the crimes, the need for a full trial was avoided. One investigator who worked on the case said, "I really think he couldn't help himself. It's like some sort of mental illness. It developed over time and became progressively worse, which is not an unusual characteristic of an offender. What will happen is they need to move on and do other things to gain the same stimulus, a bit like drugs." he became more and more dangerous in terms of his offending. The sentencing judge, Rupert Overbury, described Wilson as a serial P-word and an extremely dangerous individual. The judge looked at David Wilson and said, "You carried out a lengthy and premeditated campaign of sadistic manipulation. Any decent human being will be astonished at the level of depravity involved." Now, the full extent of what David got his victims to do is unclear. I couldn't find any sources confirming the specific details. However, I'm not sure that knowing is a good thing, and it's probably for the best to keep it secret. I, for one, am happy not knowing. But one thing is for sure, whatever it was incredibly extreme. When it came to the sentencing, the court took into consideration another thing, that David expressed willingness to work with any agency whilst in custody to address his, quote, problems. I'm not entirely sure that someone such as David is capable of rehabilitation, but there we go. On the 10th of February 2021, the judge sentenced David Wilson to 25 years in prison, with an extended license period of 8 years. Usually, criminals in the UK get off fairly lightly, so 25 years is a good indication of just how twisted David is, as some murderers don't even get this harsh of a sentence. However, many people who hear of this case believe that the sentencing is far too lenient, and that David is too dangerous to ever be released. Those who investigated the case made a point to highlight the bravery of victims who came forward. For many of them to come forward at such a young age is truly remarkable. The investigation and court proceedings were grueling, and the victims had to describe many vulnerable things. Following the sentencing, investigators described David as one of the most prolific offenders they had ever come across. To imagine for a moment being young and trusting someone online, only to receive horrific threats involving intimate photographs of you being sent to your friends and family, is a horrifying thought. David showed absolutely no regard for his many victims. The case of David left me feeling genuinely infuriated and deeply sickened. The age of the internet has brought with it so much opportunity, there is so much access to information, and it is an overall positive on the world. But with that being said, it is important to remember that people such as David use the internet for very different reasons. David is on the more extreme end of such a criminal, but sadly, he is far from rare. There are many more like him out there who can and will commit these crimes with no remorse. This case is a reminder to ensure your children are safe when using the internet. David Wilson is considered to be one of the most prolific criminals in British legal history, and the victims are currently being treated by mental health professionals. However, it is being reported that with some of the more extreme cases where David blackmailed them into essaying their siblings, that they will likely never psychologically recover.